get started. Again, Houseplants 101. My name's Cherie Schaefer, the horticulture agent here at CSU Extension in Pueblo County. So here's a little outline about what we're going to talk about. First, I want to touch a little bit on the popularity of houseplants. They have become extremely popular in recent history and especially in 2020, actually. And based on the registration of this class, I can see they're very popular and people want to get more knowledge on them. Normally, I might have about 50 people sign up for a Zoom class, but we had over 100 people sign up for this class today. So that just goes to show how popular houseplants are right now. We'll do a little brief history of houseplants, just to kind of a fun thing, just to see how far back they go. And then talk about a few of the many benefits that you can get from having houseplants in your home. And then we'll kind of get into the meat and potatoes of the class, the cultural care, including, things like watering, light, and pests, and all the things you need to know to very generally care for houseplants. And then I want to talk a little bit about propagation methods, because that is just such a fun thing to learn about if you're really just starting to get into houseplants and you want to increase your collection. Knowing a few simple propagation methods is really helpful, because you can go to a neighbor's house and possibly take some cuttings off their plants and bring them home, and it's free and it's easy and it's really fun. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll go over some specific houseplants that you can try. I just picked a handful that seem to be pretty popular. Definitely not an exhaustive list. There's so many types of houseplants, but just some to maybe inspire you on new ones that you might want to introduce into your home. So like I said, houseplants are all the rage right now. Forgive the pun, but the popularity has really bloomed during the pandemic in particular. Actually, in March of 2020, some surveys indicated that 12% of consumers of houseplants were first-time buyers. So people were just getting into houseplants. We were at home a lot. We are again. And it's just kind of nice to bring some plants into the home, bring some nature inside, make your inside living space more enjoyable to be in, since we're here more. Also this year in 2020, Google searches about houseplants have really skyrocketed. You can look up the statistics on Google, but people are really just starting to Google different types of houseplants, how to care for them, pictures of them. And also people have really been posting a lot of pictures of their houseplants on social media, particularly Instagram. If you Google houseplants Instagram, you can find so many cool pictures like this one here that I got off of Instagram. And there's tons of different houseplant groups that you can join on Facebook and other social media platforms. So people have really, really been getting into it. In the last 3 years, so in 2020, they really have been more popular, but that's not new to 2020. Actually, for the past several years, houseplants have been gaining in popularity. And in the last 3 years, sales of houseplants in the US have actually increased 50%, and for a total of $1.7 billion per year to the US economy from houseplants. So people are really spending some money on them as well. It seems that millennials are really driving that popularity increase. Millennials are waiting longer to have children and pets, and they kind of want to be free to be able to leave and go on vacation and just do whatever they want. So having houseplants allows millennials to be able to care for something and show their nurturing side, but also allows for them to go on vacation for a week and not have to worry about finding a dog sitter or babysitter. So millennials are really, really driving this houseplant revival. And if you're wondering what the most searched houseplant is, by far, it is aloe vera. That's the houseplant that people Google the most. So let's talk a little bit about the history. Indoor gardening is not new. It can actually be traced back to ancient Greeks and Romans who brought plants indoors. And then for centuries, the Japanese have been dwarfing trees to grow indoors. So your typical bonsai tree that you might see, the Japanese have been doing that for hundreds of years. It was about 1652 when greenhouses were first written about and started to be constructed. And then in the mid 1800s, they started to become more popular for, more wealthy people who could afford to construct them. And plants really started to come indoors in the mid to late 1800s as a way to brighten up those long, dreary winters in, the UK and Europe and places like that. You hardly ever see a picture of this kind of Victorian era that I have here without a bunch of plants, potted plants in it. So it's definitely something that's been going on for a long time and just starting to really come back into fashion. And there are a ton of benefits to bringing houseplants into your home. For one, they're a very important element in interior design. You can really freshen up the look of a room by adding some new plants, getting some really cool looking containers and things like that. You can play with height and depth, and it's a really cool design element that just really makes your house feel more welcoming and kind of more naturey. There have been studies from NASA that have found that plants actually do clean pollutants from the air and remove harmful compounds. So that is really great that bringing those plants in isn't only aesthetically beneficial, but actually for your health and the air quality in your home, it's beneficial in that way as well. Having if you have a good amount of houseplants in your house, they will tend to add humidity to the air, which some of you are coming from places that are more humid, but here in Colorado, we have very, very dry air pretty much all year long. So adding humidity to the air in our homes is a really good thing. It reduces the likelihood of dry skin, common colds, and sore throats. In these days, you really don't want to get the scare of having a common cold. So that's a good thing. If houseplants can add some humidity to the air and reduce that for you, that is definitely a good thing. There have also been studies that show that having houseplants actually increases your happiness, decreases the likelihood of severe bouts of depression. And it's a specific study at Texas A&M found that if you have houseplants around the area where you study and work, it does actually improve the quality of work that you're able to do. So that is definitely a reason with, all of us working from home to get some houseplants and bring them in. And when we do return to the office, maybe have to grab a few more office plants as well. So now I'm going to get into the care of houseplants. This is kind of our main chunk of presentation. Like I said, if questions do come up about any of this, feel free to put them in the chat. Stacy, yes, I see that you have a question in the chat. If I can share the Texas A&M study, and let me make a quick note of that. We do send out a follow-up email to participants, and we will include the link to the Texas A&M study. And while I'm on that subject, we will be sharing these slides as well in the follow-up email. Okay. So let's start with containers. Containers of the houseplant, it is personal preference, but it's definitely something you want to consider before you purchase a houseplant or before you repot a houseplant. And there's a lot of materials that are just fine, but they all kind of have pros and cons. So wood pots and clay pots are a more porous material. So they do need to be watered more often. That porous material will dry out faster, which is kind of the con, but they do have better oxygen movement, which is the pro. So we know that plant roots need water, obviously, and they need soil, but sometimes we forget that they do need oxygen as well. So having good oxygen movement is actually a good thing. And you might need to water a little bit more, but you have good oxygen, so good and bad there. Containers made of things like plastic and glazed ceramic, they do hold water better. You won't have to water as often, but the air movement isn't quite as good. So, kind of good and bad there as well. Whichever material you use, just make sure there's drainage. You definitely want to have drainage holes or slits or some kind of mechanism in the container that is going to allow for water to drain from the pot. Most houseplants are definitely not going to want to sit in water. That's just asking for rot and diseases to occur. So you really, really need drainage. A lot of really cool decorative pots sometimes don't have drainage holes. So, depending on the material, you can definitely drill some holes or punch some holes in the container. Another option, if you look in this photo, the large plant in the back right, you can see it's in a decorative container, but there's another pot inside of that decorative container. So that's a really good method to plant your plant in a pot that has drainage holes, and then set that pot into the decorative container. And then you can, remove it to water it so that it's able to drain, but you still have that nice looking decorative container in your home. But, it's really a personal preference. Just make these considerations. If it's a plant that you might want to move around a lot, you might want something a little more lightweight. So just think about stuff like that. But really, as long as there's drainage, any kind of container is probably going to work just fine. Light is a huge thing to consider. And this really, really depends on the plant, the specific plant. So if you do a little research when you get a plant or before you get it, usually if you purchase it from a store, it'll have a tag of some type that should tell you, low light, high light, direct light, indirect light, stuff like that. Otherwise, you can definitely call your local extension office and they can help you figure it out. But just as kind of a general rule, you're going to get low light from a north-facing window, or obviously an interior spot in your home that's not right at a window. Medium lights will usually come from an east-facing window, and you'll get high light from south and west-facing windows. Now, some of this does depend on time of year, the distance from the window, the coverings on the window. Obviously, if you have curtains, that's going to filter some light out. So that does kind of depend, but those are just kind of a general guide on how to get low, medium, and high light from your different windows in your home. Now, you'll also see on plant tags, or if you do some research on a specific plant, direct and indirect light mentioned. Some plants can't handle direct light, and that's sun rays actually directly hitting them from the sun through the window onto the actual plant. Some plants will prefer direct light, some cannot handle it. They would want indirect light, which comes from either being further back from the window or maybe the light is being filtered through a sheer curtain or something like that. Now, indirect light can still be bright. So, you might have a high light plant that wants bright high light, but doesn't want direct light. So you just need to kind of, put it somewhere where you have a curtain hanging, or maybe just a little bit further back from the window, but it still can be bright. So that's just a little guidance. And like I said, that really depends on the type of plant. Temperature is something that I don't know that we keep our houses at temperatures that we feel comfortable at. So most houseplants that you would get are going to do fine at those temperatures. Most are tropical, so they like a little bit of a warmer temperature. And they don't want to be in a super freezing cold house, but usually neither do people. So that works out well. So just very generally, most houseplants are going to want a daytime temperature between 70 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and nighttime temperatures between 65 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity is something that, again, in Colorado, we might kind of struggle with because it is so dry here most of the year. Ideally, humidity levels for a houseplant are 40 to 60%. Like I said, most of these plants are tropical, where it is more humid. So that is what they ideally want. That is probably not what they are getting in most places in Colorado. But that's okay. We can still have houseplants. We just have to maybe water a little bit more, because the drier the air, the more water the plant is going to lose. So we probably might have to water more here than other places that are more humid. If you are really struggling with the humidity in your home and you think your plants are really struggling with the humidity, a humidifier does work. It can definitely add humidity to the air if you have it in the direct area where the plants are. Just a regular humidifier that you would, put in your kids' room when they get sick or something like that. Misting doesn't really work. You might see that on some websites. The studies have shown that misting isn't super effective. You need to do it too often, and wetting the leaves all the time tends to lead to other disease issues and things like that. So that's not a super effective way to increase humidity. And you might also see pebble trays, which is what's in the photo here. You'll see this on different websites, gardening websites, and they don't hurt. They might very briefly increase the humidity right around that specific plant for a short amount of time, but they don't really increase the humidity for a long amount of time. They don't increase it a lot, but it definitely doesn't hurt. And I think they kind of look cool. So a pebble tray is fine to try if you are struggling with humidity. Water. This is probably one of the main questions I get from people is how often do I water my blank houseplant? And I can't really ever give a straight answer to that because this one really depends on a lot. It depends on the plant species. Some plants want to be a little more wet and some are going to want to be way more dry. Like we already mentioned, the container is going to impact this. The containers that are more porous are obviously going to need more water than a container that holds water better. The potting mix that the plant is in is going to make a huge difference on how often you need to water. The environment in your home, whether it's in a bright window or how humid or warm it is in your home, all of this makes such an impact on how much you need to water that it's hard to say, for this plant, you need to water every week or something like that. So the best advice on watering is to never water on a schedule, water by need. So actually check your plants and check if they're dry and if they need water. And the vast majority of houseplants are going to want to dry out a little bit on top. Most houseplants don't want to be kept super wet all the time. They'll want to dry out a little bit. So the best advice for generally speaking, is to stick your finger down into the potting soil, the potting mix, and when it feels dry up to your first knuckle, that is when you typically are going to want to water. Some plants will droop the first day that they're that dry and let you know that they need a drink of water. And those plants are they're easy to have because they'll let you know. They don't leave much for you to guess. So if you see your plant drooping, that is definitely a sign that it needs water. And overwatering and underwatering are equally bad. Some people, like me, are kind of neglectful and forget to water, and that could definitely kill a plant. But then other people are almost too good of plant parents, and they are overwatering or they water way too much, and that could definitely also just as easily cause your plant to die. So it's a really careful balance, and just get in there, check with your finger and see if it needs water, and try to control yourself if you are one of those really good plant parents and don't water too often. When you do water, you want to water thoroughly though. You want to water until the water is actually draining out of the drainage holes. And if your plant is in a saucer, like the plant in this photo, you want to drain the saucer, discard the water in the saucer after it's done draining so that it's not sitting in water and just getting, soggy feet, as we would say. Plants that want a higher light level and they are getting more light, obviously are going to dry out more. So keep that in mind. If you have plants with long leaves, like a spider plant, they tend to be a little bit more sensitive to chlorine and fluorine, which naturally occurs in our, municipal tap water. So it's good to fill up your water cans and let them sit out for, a day or a couple days or however long, and then water with that water that's been sitting out. That will allow some of that chlorine and fluorine to dissipate. It also helps with temperature because some plants are a little bit sensitive to being watered with very cold water, and the water that comes out of my tap is very cold. So it's helpful to let it sit out for that reason as well. Fertilizer, it is important. I had to learn this as a early starting gardener that houseplants really do need fertilized. You think about it, they're sitting in the same pot in the same soil for sometimes decades, depending on the plant, and they definitely need to be rejuvenated with nutrients if they're going to continue to thrive. So you do need to fertilize. Some houseplants need, relatively speaking, a lot of fertilizer, like ficus. Some need almost no fertilizer, like cacti. So this really does depend on your specific plant. Again, do some research, contact your local extension office if you're not sure. Typically, you're going to want to really only fertilize during the growing season when there are signs that it's needed. So, maybe you'll notice your plant is looking a little more pale than it used to, or that it really hasn't put on any growth in a long time. Those are definitely signs that you need to fertilize. You want to, depending on the plant, maybe once or twice a growing season, maybe more. You'll want to fertilize. During the winter, you don't really typically need to fertilize a house plant. Whatever product you choose, there's lots of great products. There's, synthetic products, there's natural products. They're all good to add nutrients to your soil. So choose a product that you like and check out the label. There should be instructions for indoor plants, and usually that's going to be a smaller amount than you would use if it's also labeled for outdoor plants, maybe a half rate or a quarter rate. So you can use a smaller amount and fertilize every watering during the growing season, or you can use a higher amount and do it less often, maybe every month or every 6 weeks or so, whatever you are finding that works with your plant. You can also try slow release fertilizers, which are in the picture here. They're usually like a granular type of fertilizer that you can either mix in while you're potting, or you can just throw on top and water in, and those will kind of release a smaller amount of nutrients over a longer time. But again, whatever you use, just look at the label and follow the label instructions, and you should be just fine. Pests. Pests are a problem for sure. Generally speaking, for pests, you should look your plants over before you buy them. If you see obvious signs of pests or diseases, maybe don't buy that specific plant. And even if you don't see signs of pests or diseases when you first bring a new plant home, you should quarantine it for a couple of weeks and monitor it. Keep it away from all of your other houseplants. Monitor it for any signs in the soil, on the leaves, on the stems of any kind of pests. Once a couple weeks go by and you haven't really seen any kinds of pests or diseases, then it's fine to introduce it to the other plants. Do be cautious of homemade remedies. There are a ton of gardening websites and threads and blogs, and there's a lot of homemade remedies that you might use, with different household products, and you should be cautious about that. These usually aren't tested by research or anything like that, and could be harmful to your plants. So if you are going to try something like that, I would suggest that you try it on just like a small part of the plant first. And then, if you see that it's totally killing it or it's reacting bad, then don't use it on the whole plant. And just do be cautious of stuff like that. Sticking with recommendations from your local extension. Those, we only give research-based facts, so those are usually a more safe bet. And when it comes to diseases of houseplants, particularly foliar diseases that you're seeing on your leaves, they're really hard to identify what exactly it is. They're really hard to control, even if you do figure out what exactly it is. So I'm not really going to touch on that. But if you are seeing more of a disease than a pest, the best thing to do is remove the infected leaves. Try to decrease the humidity. If you're misting your leaves, stop doing that and see if that helps. But yeah, they're really, really hard with houseplants. So we will go into some specific pests though. Those are a little easier to ID and control. So you may have seen this if you are a houseplant parent, scale and mealybugs. They are kind of a fluffy, cottony looking insect that you'll see on the stems, particularly in the joints of the stems. Some you can see the commonly infected plants here, ferns, palms, ficus, pothos, philodendron, jade. Really, almost everything could have the potential to get scale and mealybugs. If you catch it early, hopefully you can just prune the infected branches. If you do need to take some further measures, you can try an insecticidal soap, which you can buy at a garden center. Or you can try a 10% rubbing alcohol mixture. And again, be sure to test that on a small part of your plant first, and see that, it's not harming the plant. You can also, if you've tried everything, you really want to save this plant, you can try a systemic product that you'd water into the soil and it would get taken up into the plant with the active ingredient imidacloprid. And again, you will get these slides, so you'll have that information if you ever need it in the future. And sometimes with systemic insecticides outside, we worry about the effect that it might have on pollinators and things like that. But if this plant is only staying inside, those are more safe to use in that kind of situation. Aphids. Aphids definitely have a potential to develop on your houseplants. If you have particularly plants that go outside in the summer and come inside in the winter. So some people have ornamental peppers, their chrysanthemums, a lot of different herbs that you might bring inside for the winter might be susceptible to aphids. So the aphids are pretty weak. They're a soft-bodied insect. They're really easy to kill. And it's really the easiest thing to do is to, stick the whole pot in the shower or in the sink and spray them off with a strong jet of water. And most of the time that will take care of it. If you do need to take further measures, again, insecticidal soaps and products that have pyrethroid as the ingredient may be effective on aphids. And whenever you're buying any product, you always want to read the label, and you want to see, is it labeled for the specific plant that I'm using it on? Is it labeled for indoor plants? And then is it labeled for the pest that I see? So that's how you want to, know that you're using a product that is appropriate, is that your plant is on the label and the pest is on the label. So definitely always check that out. Spider mites. I just dealt with a little bout of spider mites on one of my plants. You might see them on your ivies, your figs, hibiscus, your Norfolk Island pine, which a lot of people tend to get around the holidays. I just experienced them on my Chinese evergreen. But again, they're pretty easy to handle. Just like with the aphids, take them outside, put them in the shower, and wash them off with a jet of water. With a lot of these pests and diseases, you'll see that they're more common when it's too wet and too humid. But with spider mites, it's the opposite. Usually they tend to prevail when the moisture is low and the humidity is low. So just go ahead and increase, maybe that's a sign that you need to just water a little bit more. If you need to, you can use horticultural oils. Again, you can get them at any garden center, or insecticides with the ingredient bifenthrin. Insecticidal soaps work okay. If you have some on hand already, you can try that, but the horticultural oils do tend to work better on the spider mites. And you'll see spider mites are so tiny, but you will see that maybe even like dirt or flecks of stuff will get caught in their webs, and you'll see webbing like in this photo. So that's kind of the main sign that you might have spider mites. Fungus gnats are probably like the most common pest that you might get in a houseplant, and they actually develop in the soil. So really any houseplant could be a host. They're all susceptible. If you do start having these annoying little gnats flying around your pots, try to let the soil dry out a little bit more between waterings. That could help. They also make these yellow sticky traps that are here in the photo, and these catch the adults. They're attracted to the color, and then they just stick right on there. And that's not super attractive to have in your home, but you know, if you don't mind and to have that there for a short amount of time, they are very effective. There's also a biological control and natural control. BT, it stands for Bacillus thuringiensis, is very effective, and that would be something that you would put into the soil, and that would kill the larva. You can also buy a soil drench with neem to control the larva. So, you know, the sticky traps are for the adults, and then those soil-based products are more for the larvae that are growing in the soil. Okay, I am going to check the chat really quick. Oops, go back here and see what kind of questions we have. Let's see here. Okay, air plants are really interesting, and actually, Linda, I'm not specifically super familiar with air plants, but yeah, they're really interesting how they can just kind of grow like they do. And if you know we can definitely look into that further. I'll have my contact information at the end of the presentation if you have some specific questions, but they're super interesting. Not personally super experienced, but I'm sure there's some studies out there we can look at and get some good information on them. Spider mites, okay, we covered that for Christine already. How about too much humidity? My plants seem to always get rotten and green stuff. I even had mushrooms grow from my houseplants. Oh my gosh, yeah. That's not a problem I've personally experienced, but totally too much humidity can be just as bad as too little. I think the best recommendation is, you know, if that's just what the humidity is in the area that you live in, there's not much you could do about that, but maybe cut back on watering a little bit and make sure that you have very good drainage in your container. And I think those would probably be the best ways to deal with that. Also, if you're picking a new container, I might lean more toward the wood and the clay, where you have better air movement so that you allow a little bit more drying out of your media. Let's see, any recommendation for labels, plant names, sun, water requirements, and more? As my plants grow, the little label from the store usually gets lost. Oh my gosh, yes. Yes, that is a problem. If you look online, I was just looking on actually Etsy the other day, they have a lot of really cute, more permanent kind of stakes that you can put into your pots. Other than that, you know, maybe like a database of the information that's separate from the plant on your phone or on your computer or even in a notebook could be a suggestion. From Pam, do you rely on soil testers? Yeah, soil testers are great. If you have one, they can definitely let you know, farther down than you can actually get your finger, how dry is it looking. And they also have ones that will tell you about, pH and stuff like that. So yeah, if you have a soil tester, they're definitely usually pretty reliable. From Stacy, recommendations for creating your own fertilizer and soil. So as far as fertilizer goes, that one's a little bit harder. You know, you can definitely create your own like fish emulsion, and we can definitely find you some resources, Stacy, for that if we can talk later. And for creating your own soil as well, yes, there are definitely recipes for potting mix that you can make at home. And one thing that you just want to be sure to sterilize it. Usually you do that kind of like in your oven at a low temperature, and I can absolutely get those resources to you if you reach out to me. Again, I'll have my email at the end of the presentation here, and I can definitely get you some of those resources. Fertilizer, yes, is plant food. Let's see. From Stacy, what is the distance between plants for quarantine? What a good, timely question. I would say that, just because different insects could potentially, fly if it's fungus gnats or something like that, I would quarantine a new houseplant in a separate room, like a separate closed off room so that, even if there are some kind of insect that starts to fly, they hopefully won't be able to actually get out of that room. From Shirley, are there benefits on using small amounts of hydrogen peroxide when watering? Not that I'm aware of. From Grace, can we recommend certain products? And actually, unfortunately, working for Extension, we don't recommend brand name products, just the ingredients. So that's why you'll hear me referring to the ingredients on the label. And we can't actually recommend brand names. Let's see here. From Shireen, what can you do with herbs and vegetables in the winter to save for the next season? Really good question. There are definitely some options. If you have a greenhouse, obviously that's the best option. You can build a little cold frame. If you look up online how to build a cold frame, there's lots and lots of plans, and that's kind of like a mini greenhouse that you can keep plants like that in over the winter. Of course, bringing them indoors into your home, doing whatever you can to just insulate them, whatever, I don't know the kind of winters you get, but here in Colorado, some vegetables are definitely not going to survive outside in any way. They need to come in or be in a greenhouse. But depending on your climate, you might be able to get away with covering them with like sheets or blankets or tarps. Christmas lights, you work really well on really cold days and nights. So those are just some suggestions that could work. How about leftover leaves of tea? Are they good fertilizer? Yeah, I don't know how much actual nutrients you would get, but adding something like that to your plant would definitely give you some more organic matter, which is always good. So yeah, that would be just fine. From Matthew, is fungus growing on the soil good? So I wouldn't necessarily say it's good, but it's not necessarily bad either. It could be pretty benign. So, if it's not harming your plants, or you don't see any really signs of anything like that, then it could be just fine. Also, if you are seeing like a white crust forming, sometimes that's not a fungus. It's actually salts built up from fertilizing. And, that could go away when you just water with regular water a few times. That could tend to kind of drain that out. From Carrie, is baking potting soil a good way to get rid of fungus gnats? Yeah, totally. Especially, if you're reusing soil or making your own, that's a really great way to sterilize it if there are any, eggs or anything like that in the soil. Using it in an oven on a low temperature is definitely a good way to do that. From Tanya, cinnamon for the gnats? Possibly. Have not seen any research on that or anything, so not 100% sure. From Shireen, asking about lilies. Let mine go dry and go brown completely. Not sure what to do after so that they can grow the following season. Wondering what type of lily specifically, and if we're talking about outdoors. And I'm wondering about your climate specifically. So maybe if you wouldn't mind reaching out to me individually, and I can get you some tailored information. Yep, and other people wanting the resources for the fertilizer and soil, we will send that out in the follow-up email. So be checking for that in your inbox. Cold frame, yes, cold frame, just how you have it there, COLDFRAME, a cold frame. And if there's so many ideas online. In BC, wet, cold, and humid. Okay, yeah, so definitely you need to bring some of those indoors during the winter. From Linda, my cacti never flowers. Is there something I could do to help them? Yes. Sometimes changing where they're at in your home. Maybe the light isn't quite right, or I find that sometimes just changing this actual site in your home can really help sometimes, and the plants will do things that you never thought you'd see them do. If we're talking Christmas cactus or Easter cactus or something like that, there are more involved steps to getting them to bloom. And you can definitely just Google that and find those steps that you need to take to get a Christmas cactus or something like that to bloom specifically. But just generally speaking, I would try putting them somewhere else, maybe a little bit more light. Usually cacti want a lot of light. In the cold winter of Tampa, should I keep mint and cilantro inside? Nasim, yes, I would definitely bring those inside if possible so that they for sure survive your winter. For pineapple, is coffee grinder good fertilizer? So yeah, you can absolutely, that's kind of the same with the tea leaves. You probably aren't going to get a huge amount of nutrients from the coffee grounds, but they will definitely add some good organic matter and kind of make even just the texture of your soil better. So you can definitely do that. And so there are lilies that can be outside, and there are lilies that can grow inside. There's a lot of different types of lilies. Like a peace lily is a super popular indoor plant. So they could go either way, to Nasim. Tanya, is there any rule of not repotting in this temperature? My 2 pothos is turning yellow a lot and getting bare, while the other 2 are doing great. No, generally people will repot during the growing season, because that's when the plants are going to kind of like actively do their most growing and spread those roots. You can repot any time of year if it really needs it. I will say most houseplants, and pothos included, don't really need to be repotted a lot. I have some pothos plants that I inherited that have probably been in their pots for like decades. So, if they're totally busting out of their pot, then you might need to repot. But really, I would try to just not, if possible. But as far as temperatures, they're inside any time of year will probably be just fine. Okay, so got through all those, and keep typing them in and we'll go through them on our next break. Absolutely. But let's get into propagation. This is kind of a fun section. So like I said, learning a few simple propagation techniques is so awesome. I mean, I have a cousin who has a literal jungle in her house. She has so many plants, and every time I visit her, I like go around and steal so many cuttings. And I have a lot of my plants that came from her. So it's a really good way to get some free plants and get, plant that might be special to you that you get from somebody you love. So here are a few methods. Stem cuttings are probably the most common. If you have a plant that's growing leaves along the stem, this is normally when you're going to want to use a stem cutting. You want to cut just below a leaf at a node. So here's a diagram to show you that the node is the area on the stem where the leaf is growing out. So you want to cut just below a leaf at a node, and then remove the lower leaves so that you maybe have like a couple or a few leaves on top, and then stem. Place that cut end into water or soil, and usually that's enough. You definitely, if you have like a rooting hormone or a rooting powder, that will help speed the process along, so you can definitely use that. If you have trouble with your cuttings, it might be humidity related. The plants are really trying to survive once we take that cutting. So if you struggle, try putting a plastic bag over the cutting, cup and all, or whatever you have it in, the whole thing covered in a plastic bag, and just kind of gradually take it off longer and longer. And that will help keep the humidity high in the beginning. So things like pothos, blushing philodendron, monstera, Swiss ivy, those are some examples of plants that you can try a stem cutting with. Leaf cuttings. You'll try this for plants that are more growing from a crown, like an African violet or a begonia or a Christmas cactus or jade. You'll want to cut medium-sized, healthy leaves. You should include a couple inches of petiole, which is like the stem of the leaf. and plant it shallow, only about a 1/2 inch down into potting soil. Treat it just like the stem cuttings. Keep it moist, keep it humid. Try the plastic bag if you need, and it should root for you. Division is a really good way. If you have plants that tend to overgrow their pots, and they also grow from a crown kind of situation. So like a peace lily, a Boston fern, or a snake plant are good plants to try division with. My peace lilies, I need to divide them all the time because they just get super crowded. And so I'm always giving away peace lilies. So you literally just while you're repotting, remove the plant from the pot, cut right through the root ball to make, 2 or 3 or however many separate plants, and repot it. Easy as that. And they should grow just fine for you. You might lose a couple stems or a couple leaves that, maybe got too damaged in the process, but just prune those off and you should be just fine once it gets acclimated. Plantlets. This is kind of an easy one. Really, this is a spider plant technique. If you have a spider plant, it kind of shoots off those little babies. But there are also some orchids that will shoot off plantlets, and you can try this method. I haven't tried it with an orchid, but definitely with spider plants a lot. So you'll see the spider plant shoot off a little plantlet on the end of a stalk, and it already will have its own little root. So it's easy. You remove the plantlet, plant it in soil, keep it a little bit more moist at the beginning, and you've got yourself a brand new little spider plant. I'm going to check for questions on propagation real quick. I know that was kind of a short section, but I think I did see some. Are there plants that you can leave for long periods of time without water for like 4 months? From Linda. I mean, yeah, there are plants that really don't need a lot of water at all, like your cacti and things like that. So depending on the environment and the pot and stuff, possibly 4 months. Let's see, just fresh soil. Oh, okay. I think Tanya's referring back to the Pothos question, just putting fresh soil into the pot. They look fine in the pot they're in, but something's wrong because they're turning yellow and 2 of them are becoming bare. That is strange. Something I've tried with my Pothos that has worked is I give it a crazy haircut. I just cut it back like crazy when I start to see like discoloring and yellowing and stuff like that. And that does sometimes help, just removing those leaves and getting them out of there. I mean, it could be a lot of things causing that too. We could definitely talk more independently. Okay, awesome. I think I got all the questions. So let's go over some houseplants to try. I'm gonna kind of breeze through this kind of fast and just show you the pictures and maybe a couple facts if there's something stand out about some of these plants. But again, you'll get these slides and you can kind of look through them with the specifics for these plants. So Pothos, really common, super duper easy. It can survive like almost in the dark. So if you have an area where it's real low light, this is a great one. This is one of my Pothos that I have, and it wasn't looking great. I just moved. It was super unhappy. You can see it starting to yellow on the end there, and I cut this thing back all the way. And I'm just looking at it right now. It's looking much better. You're looking much better over there, plant. If you see your leaves getting too pale, that might mean too much light. If you're losing the variegation on the leaves, that can mean too little light. But Pothos is really easy. Philodendron, this is blushing philodendron specifically right here, but most philodendron have heart-shaped leaves. They're, again, really, really easy, really tolerant of neglect, which is why I have one, because I just don't have time sometimes. If you do have a climbing variety of philodendron, you might need a post or something like I have there, but another really easy, really, really nice looking plant. Peace lily, one of my favorites, because again, just so easy. It will tell you, the peace lily will tell you when it needs moisture. It will droop like the day that it needs watered, and then perk right back up the minute you water it. So I like peace lilies because they leave no guessing to when you need to water. They will absolutely tell you. One thing to bring up here is with a large leafed plant like a peace lily, you don't want dust to collect on the leaves. You do want to wipe them and keep them clean, but beware of leaf shine products. They tend to clog the pores and actually attract more dust. So just wipe them with a moist rag. Don't use leaf shine. Weeping fig tree. I love these. I'm in the market for one. I want to get one. If anybody wants to get rid of one, I'm your girl. They don't like to be messed with though. If you move them, or definitely if you repot them, they're going to drop their leaves. If they're stressed at all, they're going to drop their leaves. But just, you know, let it acclimate, let it get used to its new situation, and it should be good. It is a little bit more of a heavy feeder than some of our other plants, so it will need to be fertilized a little more often. And on the same tune, this is the fiddle leaf fig, closely related to the fig tree. Again, doesn't really like to be moved, and it will also drop leaves. So the ficus are just a little touchy with like change. They don't like change. So try to just leave them, find a good spot and leave them. But they're really, really cool looking, and they can get really, really tall. I have a cutting of a fiddle leaf fig in my windowsill right now that I really hope roots, because I would love to have one. Cast iron plant, they kind of look like a peace lily, and again, super, super duper tough. It prefers to be on the dry side. So whoever asked about a plant that might be able to survive without water for a few months, this definitely might be one. It actually prefers to be dry. You can totally ignore it. And it could take a pretty low light situation too. So just so easy. Spider plant. I feel like almost everyone has a spider plant in their home. Super duper easy. Doesn't want really highlight. This is a plant that I have. This window here is north facing. So it is right in the window, but it's north facing with like the neighbor's house right on the other side. So it doesn't get a ton of bright light. It could definitely dry out. Definitely, if only if the roots are literally exploding from the top of the pot. Do you want to repot this? I inherited this from my husband's grandpa. I've had it for years. I'm sure he had it for decades. It's been in this pot for who knows how long, and it does fine. You can see the leaf tips are brown, and I probably need to let my water sit out a little bit more before I water. Aloe vera, like I said, one of the most popular ones, if not the most popular plant in America. Super drought tolerant. You really don't want to overwater aloe vera. It also doesn't need a lot of fertilizer. Same with cacti. If you want to use the gel in the leaves, you're going to want to remove the oldest leaves closest to the base and then squeeze the gel out from there. And they're just so cool looking. Snake plant, another really tough plant, and something unique about snake plant that I'll touch on is that it will be totally fine in low humidity. So people from Colorado, this is a good one. And it can take dry soil. So it's just really, really easy. Adaptable to, you know, if you have a bright spot or a dark spot, it can be adaptable to kind of either one of those. So just another really easy, really cool looking plant to try. Palms, most are going to be low light, or they can adapt to low light. So that's good if you have an area that doesn't get a ton of lights. Let's see what else. You might see your fronds, your old fronds kind of dying off and turning brown. They still can draw nutrients from those old fronds though. So kind of leave them a little bit longer than you might be tempted to before you prune them off, and let them get all the nutrients out of those leaves that they can. Jade, there are so many cool jade plants, so many cool varieties, and they're just so cool looking. I love them. They're a succulent, obviously, very long lived. Like you might have to put them in your will and give them to your children. That's how long lived they could be. Warm temperatures, high light, they'll want to dry out a little bit, not quite as much as an aloe, but still a little bit. And they can flower. I've never had one flower, but a friend of mine has a jade that flowers every once in a while, and it's just so exciting to her. This is lipstick plant. It's a viney plant. It looks super cool in a hanging basket or on shelves. It does want a little bit of a higher humidity. So whoever it was who had the high humidity, this might be a good one for you to try. And it's a reliable flowerer. It has these nice, cute red flowers, and it flowers often. So that's definitely a cool one to try. Hoyas are another cool one. I like these kind of flowy, viney plants. They are long-lived, bright indirect light. They do form these stems that don't have leaves on them, which you can kind of see in the right side of this photo, called spurs. And that's where they form their flowers. So don't prune off those spurs. You want to leave them. This is an umbrella plant, another super common one. They come in like a smaller plant version, and then the big umbrella trees that you might see the trunks kind of braided. So that's cool. Really flexible with watering and light, so they're pretty easy. And sometimes they can go pretty tall. So if you want them to bush out a little bit more, pinch those growing tips to encourage them to grow out rather than up. Okay, I'm going to leave this here. Everybody write it down. If you have any questions at all, even if you're not from Pueblo County, that's totally fine. I'd be happy to take emails with questions. You know, if you need some specific information to your area, look up if you have an extension office closer or somewhere in your state, and that could be a really good resource for you as well. Let me check the chats really quick. Some good conversation and discussion on coffee grounds, so check out the chat if you're interested in that. What do you do with the aloe vera gel from Matthew? People use it as like a skincare thing for sunburns and stuff like that, or to like make cosmetic products and stuff like that. So that would be the use that I am familiar with. Yep, slides will be shared. And yes, the session is being recorded, and I will post it on our YouTube channel, which I will include the link to in the follow-up email as well. Write a note down of that. Let's see. Cool. Yes, thank you to everyone giving your kudos and saying thanks. And I do, if you don't mind staying on for a quick second, I have a poll that I would love for you to take, and it's just a couple